Hello and welcome back to another edition of Press Pass on GNAT-TV. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Wednesday, February 9th. Also, a great pleasure to be joined by a special guest today. Well, all of our guests are special, but this one's even more special than normal. Michelle Karras is someone I'm sure many folks who are readers of the Bennington Banner are going to remember. Michelle was the editor of the Bennington Banner up until 2015. Doesn't seem all that long ago, but boy, 7 years or so will make a lot of difference, doesn't it? Michelle went out west to Colorado, where she currently is the editor of two newspapers out there, the Pikes Peak Courier and the Tri-Lakes Tribune. Michelle, good to see you again.
Nice to see you, Andrew. Thanks for having me on.
This is great. I wasn't sure if we were going to cross paths again after you bolted out of the Green Mountains and off to those other mountains out west that shall remain nameless for the moment. But we'll definitely have to ask you how the skiing is going out there in Colorado before we finish here. But anyway, great to have you with us back. And I guess the logical place to start is, what have you been doing since leaving the Banner and heading out west? Bring us up to date.
So I was very fortunate to be able to work with Andrew and several other wonderful journalists in Vermont from 2013 to 2015, a good two and a half years I was there, and I was editor of the Bennington Banner. And then at the end of the 2.5 years, I got to be also editor of the Brattleboro Reformer for a short time, and loved living and working in Vermont. It's a gorgeous place. Andrew was one of the first people I met there, I believe. I might have met you during my interview process, Andrew.
I think we did. Yes.
I met like 26 people during those couple days. But anyway, since then, so in June 2015, I moved out here to Colorado Springs. My sister lives close to Denver, and I hadn't been seeing her three little girls as often as I'd like or would have liked to, and a job came available here at the Gazette, the main paper in Colorado Springs, and I went for it and got the job and said goodbye to the Banner, which was very hard to do, and the Reformer, and so I've been out here since June 2015, so almost 7 years ago now, which is a little hard to fathom because it seems like just a couple of years ago, but anyway, the time flies. And so once I came out here, I was in the position of arts and entertainment editor for the Gazette, which is a daily newspaper with a circulation of probably about 30,000-ish people. We're in a city here, Andrew and I were just talking, it's about 460,000 people. So it's a pretty big change from downtown Bennington, which was about 15,000 people at the time. But it's a nice city. It's not super, I mean, it's a sprawling city. It's pretty big, but the downtown is very nice and manageable. And I live very close to the newspaper building. So it's been a good place for me. It's a beautiful place to live. So for a couple of years, I was doing that. I was arts and entertainment editor and also doing some local news editing in the evenings. So I did that a couple days a week, and I did the A&E editor for 3 days a week. And then after a couple of years, my role changed, and I was a features writer for the Gazette, doing a lot of, I had a whole music series where I interviewed bands, local bands, and also wrote for the home and garden pages. I did gardening features every week, which was fun, and just mostly music, gardening and art was what I wrote about. And then a couple years later, the editor of what was then 4 weekly newspapers owned by the Gazette, the owner of the Gazette, she had to move away and the job came available and I went for that. And so I've been editor of Pikes Peak newspapers for going on 3 years now. And what I like the most about it is it's a lot like managing the paper in Bennington. It's there are two papers that I manage here. They're both in very tight-knit communities of Woodland Park, Colorado, and Monument, Colorado. And it's a lot of the school news, the school features, business features, the personality profiles, the kind of things that you would read in the Manchester Journal or the Bennington Banner or the Brattleboro Reformer. So it's hyper-local journalism. It's telling people's stories and getting to know the community closely. So I've enjoyed that. So now almost 3 years in that role.
So how is journalism, if it is, different out in Colorado than it is here? I mean, you're running different types of papers, I guess, and I suppose one would say, well, journalism is journalism wherever you are. If you're working for the New York Times or the Bennington Banner, or the Manchester Journal, or the Pikes Peak Courier. But I guess I just wondered: is there a certain different local flavor or kind of approach to doing things out there that is different from what we recall from here in Vermont?
Well, I don't have to tell you, Andrew, Vermont is was a very unique experience for me in that I knew the governor by name. He knew who I was. Like I knew I had senators come to the paper just to chat. Like it's a very small community, Vermont, and that's wonderful. And you can really get to know the big figures there, like Senator Leahy. It was Governor Shumlin at that time. They were coming to me to talk. It was very strange. So here in Colorado, the politicians aren't quite as accessible, at least to me. But I am more so dealing with like the city council and the school boards and the towns of the papers I manage. So it's not like I'm talking to the governor here, like I was there. So journalism is journalism, yes, but Vermont is a very special, tight-knit community, I think, and Colorado is just a bigger market, I think.
Well, you're certainly right. That's one of the unique features, I think, about working here is that you do get to meet everybody from the governor's office on down, and it's certainly quite amazing when I stop and think about that. Really, you kind of begin to just say, "Oh yeah, I need to talk to the Secretary of State or whatever." So you call them up, and they get on the phone with you, and it's
You've
like,
been in Vermont how long, Andrew?
well, we're getting on towards some big numbers here. Yeah, about 32, 33 years now at this point, which is kind of like, how did that happen? But I guess I just wondered, as I was looking at your website earlier today and some of the editorials you've written, I guess, how do you pick some of the editorial topics that you opine on? It looked like a lot of it was very similar, local politics. I saw you were concerned about one local city council meeting that went on for 7 hours there, and
that's wrong, right? 7 hours
was,
too long.
Yeah, I can't imagine a meeting that runs till 1 o'clock in the morning. I mean, and if anyone was still there from the audience, even the poor council members who were up way past their bedtimes, I'm sure. So I guess I just wondered what gives you some of the ideas for some of those editorials? Just things that are going on, and you want to say, hey, here's what I think about that.
So yeah, I try to write something that's timely in the communities, the two communities that I manage, two community papers I manage. So yes, so last week it was the school board called a special meeting and didn't give a whole lot of notice, and nobody went to it. And it seemed a little bit like they could have been more transparent. So I wrote about that, and I wrote about the city council meeting went for 7 hours, and they put the public comment at the very end. So it was close to 1 a.m. and people stayed because they wanted to comment. But I think that perhaps there could be some more efficiencies in those meetings. I think the current council in that town is a little bit divided, a lot divided. And so they get into these sidebars, and I think it just could have gone better. So I commented on that. I expected to get some blowback from the city council, but I honestly didn't. I got some nice feedback from people saying, we thought the same thing, thanks for saying that. So that was good. But you don't write it to make friends, you write it to point something out.
Right. Yeah, I would think if I were a member of that city council was there at the town hall at 1 o'clock in the morning, I'd be saying, absolutely, right on. Let's wrap this up by 10 o'clock, let's say. Something
yeah, go home and go to bed.
So I wanted to ask you, I mean, you also had two other papers you were running until fairly recently that had to be closed down. And I guess I just wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about, the challenges, I guess, for lack of a better word, you see facing journalism. This has been much commented upon over since 2015 and earlier. We've seen the industry go through some wholesale changes. Um, some of the advertising revenue streams that used to be kind of mainstays of the business, classified advertising, for instance, the internet and social media have certainly changed the name of the game so much. But how do you see newspapers sort of coping with all of that going forward? What adaptations do you feel, people in the business need to kind of do to make newspapers hang in there?
I think my papers and the Gazette, everybody struggled through COVID. We all lost advertising revenue. It was a challenge. And my papers and the Gazette are owned by a private company, which is owned by one of the richest American citizens. I think he was 17th richest in the U.S. His name is Anschutz. So Anschutz's company, Clarity Media, owns us, and there's some safety in being owned privately. When I worked for the Banner and for the Reformer, we were owned by Media News Group, which is owned by a hedge fund, and that hedge fund has infamously kind of wringed the life out of its staff and cut a lot of staff in papers. Those papers in Vermont fortunately got purchased by someone outside, an outside private entity after I left, but Alden Global, which owns the Denver Post and had owned the Vermont papers and many, many papers in the country. They were working to economize, and it was tough because there weren't a lot of resources in Vermont at that time, and the pay scale was it was a challenging time for journalists in Vermont. There were jobs cut, and it happened here in Denver as well. The Denver Post, almost half of their staff got cut right around that time that I left Vermont, so 2015-ish. So we were very fortunate through the pandemic to be able to continue, and we didn't even have any layoffs, where a lot of newspapers in the country did have layoffs. So I considered myself and the staff here to be very fortunate. We didn't have furloughs, we didn't have layoffs, we kept our jobs. We were allowed to work from home remotely, which a lot of people did during the pandemic, but that was kind of unusual for the industry. So, and then once we came through at the end of last year, the advertising losses kind of caught up with us in the weeklies. So we had 4 newspapers. 2 of them are based here in the Springs, and then the 2 that I still have, the one in Woodland Park and the one in Monument, they weren't getting the ad numbers. The 2 that we retained were doing very well, but the 2 in Colorado Springs, the advertising numbers had dropped off, and our advertising department had gone through a lot of changes, and apparently it was just a really easy financial decision, not made by me, but made by the leadership here, to close those papers. And I had only been editor for a couple of years for all 4, but it was still emotional because the one paper, the Cheyenne edition, had been around for more than 3 decades. It's a community paper based in one of the oldest neighborhoods in Colorado Springs, and so that was really hard to say goodbye to that one. And then the other paper, which had been the Woodman edition, and then it changed names. We rebranded and called it the North Springs edition as of last May. So it had only been around for 6 months, and it really didn't get a chance to thrive or to get its footing. So it's really hard to watch those go away. But now I'm focusing just on the 2 stronger papers. And things did change with that decision. Like I only have 3 employees, or I had 2 full-time employees here. So I have one full-time reporter up in the Woodland Park paper, up in the Pikes Peak Courier, and she's wonderful. She's been reporting for 30 years for that newspaper, almost. And she knows everybody in town. She gets all the good scoops. She's a wonderful employee. And I also had an editorial assistant who helped me with all of the, the smaller details, the briefs, the crime reports. He did the newsletters. He did a lot of the work, took a lot of the workload off of me. And so when we closed the 2 papers, they said I couldn't keep him as an employee. So he didn't lose, nobody lost a job. I got to keep my job, and he got to move back over to the Gazette as a reporter. But it's just a shame that now I'm kind of doing it solo. My staff is mostly freelance. I manage a lot of freelance columnists for our opinion pages, and then a stable of freelance writers. And then I have the one full-time writer up in Woodland Park. So it's a very small operation, which sort of reminds me of Vermont in a way, because we were pretty small staff there, but not that small. And so the challenges, I'm getting back to your question, Andrew, I promise. You said the challenges.
Oh, this is fascinating. Okay.
Facing journalism. They're the same here as they are in Vermont. But the Vermont newspapers, the Journal, the Banner, the Reformer, they've gone through 2 owners since the time I left. And they're both private companies, so I think that's good for those papers. Hopefully, I don't know, maybe you have a different perspective on that. I don't know much about the newest owner. But we're all facing ad revenue, that's not as robust as it was 2 years ago before the pandemic. We're facing rising costs of living, difficulty finding staff, qualified staff, and retaining staff. I'm talking about the Gazette in general. And for me, keeping good freelancers, I guess, is my trouble sometimes. So the challenges are the same. It's just a different market.
Do you see some of the ways that papers have tried to kind of work through this, using, like social media platforms, Facebook obviously being one, Twitter, and the rest of them, along with newsletters? I see you publish a host of newsletters. I subscribed to one of them earlier this morning, so I'll be able to keep tabs on it from now on. But are those going to be, are those the kind of the main pathways forward? I mean, if there does come a time when a printed paper is just either just not economical anymore and everything is going to be online on a website, or is there another path that you see? Because a number of people I've talked to have said, there's just no substitute for the hard copy printed paper. There's just something about that's a community glue of some sort that everyone can relate to, and if we get to a point where everything goes online, just something really important is going to be lost.
Well, in Southern Vermont, I think a lot of our readership there weren't as comfortable with the digital. When I joined the team in 2013, we were just kind of becoming more digital first, which was actually the name of the company, but we were starting to put things on Facebook and starting to get things online before they went in print, which was unheard of before then. And breaking the news before the next morning when people would get the paper. But it's a hard transition because not a lot of people there, some people didn't even have computers really. Some people don't use the internet there. There's an older readership that likes their print paper, and that's great. I love the print paper. I love reading the print paper. However, we are moving toward a more, now 7 years later, digital is more common. The younger readership gets their news from social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook, or directly from other news sites. And all the papers have their own apps. They have their websites. They have their social media accounts across many platforms. We do Facebook and Twitter for my little ones, and the websites for my papers only launched in, I think 2015, maybe 2016-ish. So the websites were new. It was mainly the print legacy here too. We also have these papers are in communities where we've done a readership survey where the majority of the readers are over 65. They don't have children at home anymore. They're not as interested in school sports. They'd rather hear about arts. They want to hear about crime. They want to hear about business. So it's a different demographic. The newsletters are new. We just launched those for my weeklies this year, and I just started putting those together a few weeks ago when we changed over. We lost those 2 papers, so I actually make those. That's a great way to engage with a new audience. It's free. People can see what's in your paper and get a taste of what's in there. My papers are free, so you don't even have to subscribe. You just have to live in a certain geographic area. But just to get more people engaged and potentially get more advertisers by saying, look, this is what we're reporting on this week. Don't you want to see more, in the paper? I read the New York Times newsletter every morning. They do a wonderful job. But that's not everybody's cup of tea, but that's mine. I don't know if you read that one too, Andrew. Which newsletter did you subscribe to? The Gazettes?
Your news one, breaking news or something like that. I can't remember now exactly what it's called. Yeah. So
that's the thing about Colorado Springs that's so much different, I think, from Vermont is the crime, the number of homicides, the violent crime here is far and away more than Vermont in total. It's a city. There are murders almost every day. It's weird. It's shocking. And there are crimes. There's the theft, the domestic violence. Everything seems to be a lot more fast-paced here than in Vermont. So
we have our share of crime here too, as you remember, and but you're right. I think when there is some kind of really vicious, serious crime, it is kind of shocking even now. But there's been certainly concerns about that, and of course amped up a bit. I think in the last 2 years with COVID, where things got not quite the same as they were before. I wanted to ask you another question about the industry in general, and what you thought about the whole nonprofit sector of the business, or where you saw that going. I mean, you remember VT Digger here is one of the examples of a nonprofit paper, and I guess there's an operation, the Colorado Media Project. It's based out in Denver. It looks like it has is trying to help nonprofit papers out in Colorado. I wonder if you saw that as one pathway forward for the business, where instead of having to be so reliant on advertising revenue, it was another way to kind of meet expenses and grow a business, as opposed to just trying to hang on to what you had.
Yeah, and so the Colorado Media Lab is newer than Vermont Digger. I think Vermont Digger does a wonderful job of aggregating news from all over Vermont. They have a wonderful newsletter that I get to. I keep up with Vermont through them and 7 Days and just on other news sites there. But Vermont Digger is a success story. It really works for that state, I think. Here it's newer. They're kind of trying to get it off the ground. So it would be wonderful if more papers could be in the nonprofit model, because there's like Alden has a corner on the market. They own so many papers. It's so another model is needed, and this nonprofit model is kind of new and emerging. And let's hope that more companies can do as well as Vermont Digger has done in Vermont. In my opinion, I think they do a great job. So we'll see how the Colorado Media Lab does. I'm watching them too. And there are papers out here too that have spun off of, so like a bunch of people left the Denver Post and they started this new paper called the Colorado Sun. And it's doing very well. They actually they've hired people away from the Gazette. They've hired a lot of good talent, and they tell really good in-depth stories without having to print a paper. And that takes away some of the legacy costs. So that's kind of exciting model as well. And what else do we have here that I wanted to talk about? My own company started an e-edition only paper. It's called the Denver Gazette. So it gets us in the Denver market, the Gazette of Colorado Springs. The owner has always wanted to compete in the Denver market. And so 3 years ago now, or 2.5 years ago, they launched the Denver Gazette, which is not printed. It's all e-edition. So advertising dollars are different. Our owner has the resources to put into it to see how this experiment goes. We share a lot of resources. We share reporters. We share some of the designers. They all are based here, or the designers are all based here in Colorado Springs, but we have a team up there of writers in Denver, and there's another office in Denver doing that. So that's another kind of model, e-edition only or digital only, that's being floated now.
Well, we have time for one more question. I saved the most important one I'm going to ask
you. Over already?
Last. How's the skiing out there? I bet it's not as good as it is here this year.
I've seen it's really good there. So, Andrew, I had to have an ankle surgery in December because I'm not as graceful as, well, I've never been graceful. Anyway, I had a bad couple of sprains. And anyway, so I'm not skiing this year. I'm still recovering from my ankle surgery. So it's so sad, right? But the skiing has been good. We've gotten a lot of good snow recently. My sister, who lives in Denver, and her family, they go all the time. And so I'm sad to not be skiing this year, but hopefully next year.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I haven't been out yet either, and the skiing has been, I'm sure, fantastic. We haven't gotten.
Go to Bromley or Stratton?
Both is where I used to go, and hope to again.
I loved living there because you could pick from Bromley, Stratton, Mount Snow, Magic. I love Magic Mountain.
Right.
A lot of good skiing in southern.
A lot of good opportunities, yeah, and they're all kind of different too in their own different ways. But I remember my trip out to Beaver Creek there a few years ago. We won't get into the numbers or anything like that, but skiing out in the Rockies was certainly an experience everybody ought to have at some point or another.
It's beautiful. It's gorgeous, and the runs are a lot longer. Tires out your legs quicker.
And fortunately, the lodge is warmer, or should be. Well, Michelle, boy, this was great. Really glad that you were able to make the time for this conversation, and well, we'll have to have you back on Press Pass again, and maybe team you up with some of your old buddies from the Banner, and you can trade war stories or whatever, or kind of,
I'd love to come back. Thanks for having me, Andrew. I hope I was coherent and engaging.
It was great to have you, and and I'm just so glad that we had an opportunity to reconnect electronically. It's just fascinating how this all works in this modern era.
Andrew and I also are fierce competitors in the Words with Friends.
That's right. I think you've been beating me too much lately, so
I don't think so.
We're going to have to figure out a way to change the dynamic on that one.
No, you're winning.
Anyway, great to see you again, Michelle. Thanks again for your time, and good luck out there. I'm sure I'm going to enjoy reading those newsletters.
Thank you, Andrew, and we'll stay in touch.